Thank you, Sanjay. So, most welcome to everyone after some interval, a short interval. Now we are beginning, I think this is the 13th session. You may remember, during the last session, I was discussing a very important aspect of Advaita philosophy, which is technically called as an approximation in Western thought, especially in Greek thought. It is called apophatic mysticism or apophatic theology, apophatic negative theology, to be more precise in the context of Christian theological tradition, which essentially means trying to explain something by trying to describe something by describing what it is not. Now, I mentioned, very briefly, I described the parallelism between the Advaita concept of apophatic theology and Meister Eckhart's concept of the supreme reality going beyond the Trinity, this I mentioned. In fact, a much more precise and more profound idea of apophatic thought is found in a much earlier work. It's Plato's Dialogues. They call the Apology. And surprisingly, you find those of you are, at least some of you, I would like to imagine that some of you may be familiar with Plato's Apology, where there's an interesting story. Socrates was considered to be the most intelligent, the most knowledgeable, the wisest man of ancient Greece, Athens. Not because he said that he knew something, but because he said he did not know anything. Now, in order to know that you don't know anything, either you should be a total ignoramus, which he was not, obviously, or you should be a man of supreme wisdom. These are only two options. Obviously, Socrates was a man who was very knowledgeable. Now, I would, before actually begin going ahead with this, I would like to refer to two important verses in the Kena Upanishad. And in fact, that is as profound a statement as the one which I quoted earlier in the Mandukya Upanishad, the seventh mantra of Mandukya Upanishad. In fact, the earliest document of apophatic mysticism or apophatic theology is found in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which will I take later, because Brihadaranyaka is part of Shukla Yajurveda, which is much more ancient than Kena Upanishad and, of course, Mandukya Upanishad, and certainly thousands of years older than Plato's Dialogues, obviously. So, it's very interesting for anyone who can enjoy this intellectual adventure. I mean, just to see these great men, the Socrates in Athens and the great sages in India, in those ancient times, talking about the supreme reality, the heights of intellectual and mystical ascent you can find in both in Socrates, that is Plato's Dialogues, mostly Plato. Plato is putting things in Socrates' mouth, but he was a very, very competent disciple of Socrates, and of course in the ancient Vedic literature. Those of you who have got a text, maybe not in your hands right now, but you can refer later. It comes in the Kena Upanishad, which is actually part of Samaveda. In every Veda has got, Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad. Chandogya and Kena means Chandogya Upanishad, which contains Tattwamasi Mahavakya, and Kena Upanishad. These are two great Upanishads belonging to Samavedic tradition. Which I mentioned, I gave my lectures on Samavedas for the Stanford. You can listen to that, how Samaveda contains the genesis of great. The human musical aspirations. The first musical document you can find in Samaveda. Anyway, now coming to this Upanishad, the first mantra comes in the second section of Kena Upanishad. The mantra is very simple. Yadi manyase suvedeti dabhramevapi nunam tvam vedha brahmano rupam yat asya tvam yat asya deveshu atha nu mimamsameva te manye vididam. The statement. What it essentially means is a document of ignorance. What does an ignorant man say? An ignorant man will tell you, where the point is, I know Brahman. So the mantra is this. If you think, that's a translation. If you think, I know Brahman well, then it is certain that you don't know it. How do you understand this? Brahman, the supreme reality, is beyond empirical perception. When you use the word I know this book, I know the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. What does it mean? I have seen with my eyes. I know the taste of a chocolate, which means I have experienced the sweetness of a chocolate. These are all empirical perceptions. That's in the normal palace. I know, which means I have connected with that object, with my mind and my five senses. With my eyes, I see. With my ears, I hear. With my sense of touch, I may touch. And with the sense of smell, I may know of the existence of something by smelling. And the sense of taste. This is what empirical perception. If a person tells you, well, I know Brahman, it is for sure that he is a fool in the Vedantic sense. Why? Because he thinks that Brahman is something that he can perceive empirically. The way he can see San Francisco Bridge, which is a clear proof that he doesn't know Brahman. So that's the statement here. Now, in the Plato's dialogues, there is a very interesting episode, There was a discussion in ancient Athens whether Socrates is actually a very intelligent, wise, knowledgeable person or not. So somebody went about inquiring, and they asked many people, many scholars, logicians, lawyers, they asked. And they all said, well, I know this much, I know that, they said. But Socrates said, I don't know anything. So what Socrates meant was, I know that which is beyond empirical perception. So I know that the supreme reality cannot be empirically perceived. Which means Socrates knew the fact that supreme reality is beyond verbalization. In fact, that's the essence of epiphatic mysticism. Anything that is beyond words, books, either epistemological or eschatological, either through pramana shastram, as we call in Sanskrit, pratyaksha anumana uvana sabda arthavatya anupalabdhi. If you extend further, sambhava aitihya cheshta parisheshya. So that means the supreme reality is beyond verbalization. I shall explain what verbalization means in course of time. You know what it means? Anything which can be explained in some context is verbalization definition. For example, if you want to say what it is, you have to either explain it in terms of some action connected with that person or object. He's a musician, he's a driver, he's a gardener, he's a teacher. So you are implying the person in the context of what the person does. It's a karma. Karma is one method, one way of verbalization. So it is called, Panja Sabda Pravarti. Means 5 types of verbalization. So, the point is, if you want to explain somebody something, you want to explain him in terms of some action he does or some kind of characteristic. He's a white flower, blue flower, he's a good person, or maybe he's a nice person, whatever it is, some quality, this guna. So karma, guna. These are two of the 5 types of requirements, principles of verbalization. Another one is some kind of genetic, either he's a human being, he's a mammal, he's an animal, or something like that. Or some kind of relationship. He's my uncle, my nephew, friend, and whatever it is. Some kind of sambandha means relationship. So karma, guna, jati, sambandha. Another one is dravya, means obvious. See, if you want to explain something or somebody, it's like a sun or a moon or a sky, then nobody asks the question, what is a sky? So it is well known, loka prasiddha, means pratyaksha siddham is called in technical language. So these are 5 types of verbalization. Now, the absolute reality in both Eckhart's apophatic theology or negative theology, as well as Plato's dialogues, is beyond 5 possible verbalizations. Beyond words, beyond language, beyond intellectual concepts or intellectual conceptualizations, we may call it. So in Sanskrit called vacha magochara, means going beyond transcending words, not visible for words. Called sarva pramana vati, beyond all epistemological and eschatological principles. Now, that mantra, the next mantra shows something else. What is the sign of a wise man? It says, the mantra is the second mantra of the same section. It is, Naham manne suvededi, no na vededi, yo nastad veda, yo na vededi. So I shall try to explain this. Naham manne suveda iti. I do not know Brahman. But I cannot say I do not know. I don't know Brahman, but I cannot say I don't know. What it means is a more complex word. In fact, that is precisely the concept of going beyond Holy Trinity in Eckhart and going beyond verbalization in the original Plato's Platonic apophatic theology. Naham manne suvededi, no na vededi vedacha, yo nastad veda tad veda, no veda iti vedacha. What it means? I do not think that I know Brahman, the absolute reality. That means, because I know only empirical things. And absolute reality is beyond empirical. So in the empirical sense, I cannot say I know Brahman, because Brahman, the absolute reality, in Eckhart's language, God. Listen, you have to put the word God when you interpret in the language of Eckhart, because for him the monotheistic God always remained as the absolute. He used the word, though actually negative theology is totally inapplicable. It cannot be applied in the context of any monotheistic theological discussions. Apophatic theology or negative theology can be logically applied only in the context of a transcendental, all-pervading, impersonal, divine spirit, that is Brahman. So, in this context, what it means is, I do not think that I know. Because the person knows, he has this full conviction that what he has seen or what he can claim that he knows is not absolute reality. which means he knows that absolute reality is beyond empirical perception. But at the same time, I cannot say that I do not know. Why? Because I have known the fact that the absolute reality is beyond empirical perception. You can never really understand, you will never get the conviction that the absolute reality of God, let us say use the word God because it's more convenient, because I am now addressing most of the audience I am addressing perhaps may not be familiar with the nuances of Advaitic philosophy or epistemology, so I shall just use as far as possible, I use the word God. What I mean is Brahman, the impersonal absolute reality. So, if I say that I cannot say I do not God, at the same time I say I don't think I know God. What it means, I know that God is beyond sensory perception, empirical perception. At the same time, I have realized the fact God is beyond empirical perception. That realization is not possible unless you know that God is what God really is. When you realize the absolute reality is beyond words, it's only a matter of inner experience, then you realize the true nature of God. You also realize that it is beyond empirical perception. So that's why it's the Vedic mantras may look a bit complicated, but it's very simple. The Advaita is actually very simple. I can explain once more. If a person tells you, well, I have seen God, you ask him, well, I have seen God sitting somewhere. The way you can see the mountain, a valley, a bus or a car, like that. Well, I know, I have seen God. It's sure, absolutely no doubt that he has not seen, he did not have any experience. Because if you get any divine experience, the first thing you realize is that that divine experience is beyond empirical perception. At the same time, when a person reaches that level of higher realization, when he really becomes a Brahmajnani, he cannot say that he doesn't know Brahman. It will be a lie. At the same time, he cannot say he knows Brahman, because the word knowledge always implies empirical knowledge. The way we see things in front of us, we see or we touch, we smell, our mind and the five senses of perception coming together, we perceive, we cognize things. So in that sense, we cannot say we know Brahman, we know the absolute reality, we cannot say. At the same time, when a person becomes a Brahmajnani, he cannot say that he is not a knower of Brahman, it will be a lie. So this is one level of the original, one of the oldest references to apophatic mysticism. Another one which I am referring to, and that is very important, is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is a very, very famous mantra, one of the most important mantras. Of course, you need a little bit of background for this. It's a dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Gargi. Gargi was a very learned, a saintly philosopher of ancient India. She was living in Mithila, and Mithila's king was Janaka. Janaka was a philosopher king. He is considered to be a philosopher king. Along the lines of Plato's own definition of who is a philosopher king in Republic. He was the most powerful monarch of his time, but he was totally detached. So he used to hold long discussions and debates in his court. And two of the most profound scholars who used to be present in the assembly of scholars were Yajnavalkya and Gargi. Yajnavalkya was actually a teacher of Janaka. Janaka was the name of the king of Mithila. And Gargi was a firebrand lady. Used to go everywhere and challenge the greatest scholars of her times and in the assembly of various scholars. So, at the beginning of this dialogue, it is in the third chapter of Brihadaranyaka, eighth Brahmana, and maybe it's eighth mantra. So I shall read the mantra and I shall explain later, but I want to create the right background. It's a very profound concept. So Yajnavalkya said that this absolute reality is beyond the 5 principles of verbalization, which I mentioned earlier, Dravya, Jadi, Guna, Karma, Sambandha. Something that is obvious, like sun or clouds, or some characteristics, some action, or maybe some relationship, or some kind of generic background. These are 5 conditions of verbalization. And Brahman is beyond these 5 verbalizations, meaning Panja, Shabda, Pravritti, Nishedha, in the language of Shankaracharya. So Yajnavalkya had already proclaimed in the court that this truth is beyond all words, definitions, descriptions, and epistemological conceptions. But then he gives a long dialogue on what Brahman is. So it is a contradiction. You tell somebody that it is beyond description and you go on describing it. So Yajnavalkya uses a technique here. What he says is, well, I have heard it being said by knowledgeable persons. Then he goes on giving a long description. You know the reason? Because if Yajnavalkya responds by saying it is beyond words, so I will not give a reply, they can tell him he's an ignorant man. At the same time, if he gives a long description, in his own words, they can tell him you are contradicting yourself. You say that it's beyond words, and then you give a long dialogue, your long discussion, long description, definition. So Yajnavalkya, he gives a long definition and description, but he says, this is the view of the knowledgeable persons. So that's the background of the mantra. Sahovaja edadvaita daksharam gargi brahmana abhivadanti. So brahmana abhivadanti, what it means? Oh Gargi, you are asking this question. It is aksharam, it is beyond, it is the supreme, the eternal, the infinite, beyond description, beyond words, beyond definitions, beyond discussions. So Yajnavalkya says, but the knowledgeable persons talk like this. Then he puts all this in the mouth of these knowledgeable persons, called Brahmanaha Abhivadanti. He says, then he goes on telling, Asthulam, Ananu, Ahraswam, Adirgham, Alohidam, Asneham, Achayam, Atama, Avayu, Anakasham, Asangam, Arasam, Agandham, Achachuskam, Asrotram, Avak, Amanaha, Atejaskam, Apranam, Amukham, Amatram, Anantaram, Abhahyam. These says, Na tadasnadi kinchana, na tadasnadi kinchana. This is the interesting. I shall try to explain this. What he says, Gargi, I cannot explain this, as you know, it's beyond words. So I won't explain to you. But I shall tell you the views of those who know all about it. Then he goes on telling. That is actually his own attempts. So that is actually, it comes very close to what Eckhart did, Of course, Eckhart he lost his life, most probably. He was asked to come to Rome, and we don't know what happened. He just disappeared. But you can imagine Yajnavalkya and Gargi were arguing all this in the court of Janaka, and they were applauding. They were not excommunicated. They were respected and honored. So that's a contrast. This happened thousands of years before Eckhart was born. Eckhart, remember, he belonged to 13th century. He lived in Germany, greatest theologian of Catholic Christian mystical tradition. A great man and great saint, a Dominican priest. So what this mantra means is this. O Gargi, according to those who know all about Brahman, this Brahman is indestructible. It is neither gross nor insignificantly small, neither short nor long, neither reddish nor oily, neither shadow nor darkness, neither air nor ether, unattached, neither essence nor smell, without eyes, without ears, without speech, without mind, without splendor, without the vital air or mouth, not a measure, and without interior, without exterior. It does not eat anything, and none eats it. These are all descriptions. What it means is neither gross nor subtle, neither short nor long, and so on. So remember, the absolute reality can only be explained by trying to explain what it is not. What it is, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, that is a Surupa Lakshana, which I explained in the last class. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. Then you may ask this question, what is Surupa Lakshana? Surupa Lakshana is an attempt to give the essence of it. Tadastha Lakshana, which we explained in the last session, yato vayumani bhutani jayande yena jatani jivandi yat prayende visam visanti tad vijñāsasva tad brahma. In the second Brahma Sutra, janma yasya yataha, means the supreme origin of the universe, the origin from which all this entire universe originates. The indirect way of explaining what is beyond explanation. But here it is supreme. It's called Neti Neti. So the supreme reality, which is beyond empirical perception, beyond words, beyond descriptions, beyond definitions, can only be implied by trying to say what it is not. Now, in this context, what Yajnavalkya says is called Nishedha Mukha Lakshana Vakya, means it's called a negative theology. Actually, the word is used Nishedha Mukha Vakyam. In the Vedic literature, the Upanishad literature itself, you find lot of statements where the supreme reality is described in terms of what it is not. Because what it is only a matter of our own inner experience. What it is not, we can certainly try to explain. So, this way, perhaps, historically speaking, this is the first attempt at this the tradition of apophatic mysticism and apophatic theology. So, in this, Yajnavalkya is finding a solution to this trap, because Gargi was trying to put him in a trap. Yajnavalkya made some very elaborate statements in the earlier discussions, saying or emphasizing that the supreme reality is beyond words and definitions. So how does he answer my question? If he answered by giving a long description, I can defeat him by saying that he is contradicting himself. And if he, on the other hand, says, well, I told you earlier that I cannot explain this, so I won't say anything, then she can say that he doesn't know that. So, in the language, avachyam aham na vadishyami. Aham avachyam na vadishyami. I am not going to tell you what cannot be talked about. At the same time, nacha na pratipaddeyam. At the same time, I am not avoiding trying to give a description. I am not running away from your question. At the same time, I am not contradicting my previous statement that the absolute reality cannot be defined or described. This is the important document here. And now I will try to come back to our previous session that we discussed earlier. The last session we already described briefly, but it needs some more elaboration, I believe. That is the mantra, the original mantra that we began with. That is the 7th mantra of Mandukya Upanishad, which we already took somewhat briefly, but it should be completed today. na antaprajnam, na bahishprajnam, na ubhayataprajnam, na prajnanaganam, na prajnam, na aprajnam, adrishyam, avyavakaryam, agrahyam, alakshanam, achindyam, avyapadesyam, ekatma pratyasaram, prapanchopashamam, shantam, shivam, advaitam, chadutham manyanti, sa atma, sa vijneka. So as I mentioned earlier, Mandukya Upanishad that we discussed in the last session, it approaches the Supreme Reality and analyzes the nature of Supreme Reality using a particular technique in Vedanta. It's called Avasthatraya Prakriya, means the method of analyzing or understanding or realizing the Supreme Truth on the basis of these triple levels of human consciousness: Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, or waking state, dream state, and deep sleep state. So mantra tells you that this Turiya, as I mentioned, Turiya, Turiya can also mean the fourth. So there are three levels of human awareness, that is waking state, that is Jagrat state, Swapna or dream state, or Sushupti or dreamless sleep or deep sleep state. Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, three avasthas. So there is one subject, witness, drashta, perceiver, the subject, which is present in all the three states. If the same drashta, the same perceiver is not present in all the three states, we won't be able to remember what dream we had, or even the fact that we had a dream. And not only that, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot have a dream which is totally detached and separate from our waking state experiences. There are clear-cut, clearly defined differences between waking state and dream state. In waking state, this they call, Desha Kala Sushma Sthula Bheda, means three levels of differences in terms of space or place. You may go to sleep here, and you may dream you have reached another country, another place, thousands of miles away. Again, time. In waking state, it may take 6 hours for you to reach New York. In dream, a split second. And then in the waking state, everything is perceived and experienced at the gross level. Gross level means we are using our mind, and the senses of perception and senses of action are involved in all experiences during waking state. These experiences that we gather in waking state are accumulated in our mental system, and then when we dream, depending upon the experiences that are uppermost in our mental horizon, these experiences are again projected forward, and in dream we create our own world at the mental level without the involvement of the senses of perception and senses of action. So it is called sukshma or subtle experience. There are differences. At the same time, you can never have a dream without some content you have accumulated during waking stage. When I was giving this class, we have more than 144 classes in Mandukya in our history resources. So people used to ask this question. They used to say, in dream we may dream we are flying in the sky, but we don't do that in waking state. Don't you think it's a complete difference? In waking state we can't fly unless we use a plane. But in dream, you may dream flying in the sky like a bird. But there what is happening is, the idea of flying we have already gathered in waking state, and we have seen bird. So, and the desire to be like that. So, in dream, these are mixed together, so they create this dream. A child, if it depends upon what you are, who you are. A child walking the street, looking at a shop selling sweets, may ask his father to get him some sweets, and the father may tell him that it's not good for your health, but child wants that. That night the child may dream eating plenty of those very sweets that he could have wanted to eat. So this is a simple experience for children. If we depending upon our youth or age, whatever may be our age or biological or cultural or psychological conditions, all these experiences gathered in waking state are projected at the mental level in dream. And in deep sleep, what is happening is everything is merged in Mula Avidya according to Vedanta. It is total vacuum. In waking, in Sushupti or deep sleep, when we don't have a dream and we are not in waking state, still we experience something, and that's the reason why when we get out of deep sleep, we get the feeling that we had a wonderful rest. No one can live in this world without Sushupti. If you don't get Sushupti, you go mad. Your mind will not be able to survive mentally, except some saints. You have heard of this Saint Peter of Alcantara. He's a Spanish saint. He couldn't sleep because he was a tall man, but he lived in a tiny cell. He was a Spanish mystic who lived in the 16th century. He was the patron of Saint Teresa of Avila, which I visited recently, the place. Now the point is, how could they live without Sushupti? They compensated that through prayer. So somehow you are getting restfulness. That's why Vedanta tells you, Shankaracharya says in his Bhashya, a human being can have complete rest only in deep sleep, Sushupti, or in some kind of devotional ecstasy or samadhi. Because in these two states, our senses become completely rested in a transcendental consciousness. At that time, we are able to get complete rest. So that's the point. So this mantra says that Turiya, that is that witness which is present in all the three stages. It's called Turiya. This is an important thing to remember. The witness, the drashta, the subject which is present in Jagra state, Swapna state and Sushupti state, which is detached from all the three states but present in all the three states. That witness is called Turiya. It belongs to every layer. At the same time, it is not limited to any of the states. This is important thing to remember. So this mantra says that Turiya is not that which is conscious of the internal subjective world. It is not just the drashta of dream state. At the same time, it is not the drashta or the witness of the waking state. And it is not a combination of both. And it is not just a mass of sentiency, and nor is it simple consciousness, and it is not insentient. So every negative is used to avoid the possibility of being interpreted as something negative. For example, it is said, it is not prajna, na prajnam, na prajnam. It all means here. The point is, suppose you say Brahman, God is good. In fact, Eckhart didn't agree with that. Because if you say God is just the totality of all that is good, then you need a devil to take the burden of all that is bad. Then you are bringing duality, Advaita. Actually, if you divide the celestial world into two incessantly conflicting camps of good and bad, devil and his army and God and his army, the problem is simple. But Vedanta goes far beyond that, and they can't dare to go beyond that. The point is, so the negative, the unpleasant, is not separate from the totality of reality, but it is only a layer, it's a lower layer. So that's why, it is said, Swami Vivekananda once mentioned, the sannyasa is love of the terrible. Now, how do you explain that? If you want to be, let's say, sannyasa is a Sanskrit word, I would say put it in modern commonplace English language, called, let's say, mendicancy or mysticism is love of the terrible. What do you mean by that? It's a great word. Because if you love the terrible, then you have nothing to be afraid of in this world. That's an important thing. If you can love the negative, if you are in good terms with the negative, then there is no need for you to be afraid of. If you can be a friend of all that is bad in this world, you don't have to be afraid of the bad. Philosophically, logically speaking. The totality cannot be limited to the concept of totality of all that is good, because in that case you have to invent a devil to represent the opposite of the goods. So Vedanta tells you that even God cannot be defined as the totality of all that is positive. That's what Eckhart actually tried to do. It's a very, very daring attempt for a Christian theologian to do. Of course, he would have lost his head for that. Thank God he didn't. He disappeared, of course. So that's the greatness of this statement. Now, coming to the subject, of course, the mantra continues, it is unseen, it is not comprehensible by any of the senses of perception. I mean, eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste cannot comprehend or understand the supreme reality. It is not related to anything. It is not unrelated to anything. It is the unthinkable. It is beyond inference, beyond anumana, beyond pratyaksha. It is unthinkable, indescribable. Essentially, is the nature of consciousness constituting the self alone. So, very famous mantra, you can see. What it says is, Ekarna pratyasaram prapancho vashame. Ekarna pratyasaram. What it means? If you just analyze, well, what was I or who was I when I was dreaming? And where was I when I was in deep sleep? Just go on thinking. That thought itself will be able to take you all the way to the supreme realization. In fact, that's what Ramana Maharshi did. What Ramana Maharshi did was, he was a lonely traveler and reached a supreme experience. But Shankaracharya was a huge ship. A ship has to take thousands of passengers, animals, cows, and if in India you have to take cows, animals, chicken, everything, hence everything. Even elephants also sometimes will be ferried across rivers. You go to India, you find. So a huge ship has to carry all these things, vehicles, planes, everything. But a boat has to, but if you know how to row across the river, you can take a boat and you can reach the other end of it. So the great teachers of the world are like huge ships. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. So Ramana Maharshi actually is a supreme example of a person who applied this method. You can imagine, Ramana Maharshi's father died. He was himself, but he thought of where did my father go? And he thought, it doesn't happen to everyone because of his previous life cycle, sadhana, spiritual practices. He had already traveled a long distance in spiritual life in his previous life. He had reached a very high level of evolution. So the death of his father was enough for him to make a U-turn in his life. And he leaves his place, Tiruvannamalai, and then he comes to Tiruvannamalai and becomes the great Ravana Maharshi that we know today about. So that's the greatness of it. So those who have reached this high level of spiritual evolution, for them, any worldly experience which reminds them of its limitation, any experience that reveals the limitation of worldly life, worldly experience, suddenly father, dear father, beloved father suddenly disappear. Means he dies and body is cremated. Of course, body is put in funeral pyre, and this great saint who would be saint, he leaves his home, and you can see the rest of his story. Paul Brandon heard about him in New York. A journalist travels all the way to Chennai and go to Tiruvannamalai, and this story begins. So how did it happen? Because Ekarma Pratyaya Saram. There is one Atman, one supreme reality with a witness, subject, drashta, who was present in all the three stages, Turiya. When you focus on that, you can reach your own real spiritual home, Prapanchopashamam. Then at that time, the world merges itself into the supreme reality. Shantam, Shivam, Advaitam, Chadurtham Manyande, Sa Atma, Sa Vijñeha. It is the fourth state. Now, there is something very interesting, there's a bit of humor in it. Shankaracharya in his commentary, Chadurtham Manyande, Sa Atma, Sa Vijñeha. Also while explaining the Turiya word, he says, the fourth state as a meaning. Now what it means that? Does it mean that Jagrat state, waking state, dream state, deep sleep state, and then Turiya state? So is Turiya the fourth state? If Turiya is the fourth state, then you cannot say that Brahman, Atman, Turiya, the all-witness, all-knowing witness was present in all the other three states. If the fourth one, you cannot say it was present in all the three states. So he says, it's not like the 4 legs of a cow, but it's like a 4 quarters of a coin. This is in Bhashya. I can read, I have no time, I think time is over. So, but anyway, I shall try to explain this. This is an important thing in Vedanta actually. Now, suppose you take 4 legs of a cow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one is separate and different from the other. You cannot say they are all combined. 4 legs of a cow. So, is the fourth state, Turiya, the transcendental state, is the fourth stage in our evolution? No. Then he says, no. It is like the 4 quarters of a coin. Suppose, well, let us say we have $1 coin, then 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents. Let's say, imagine, let's say. Now, if you have got a half-dollar coin, it contains the quarter and also the half. Half-dollar coin contains the value of 1 quarter and also the half. 3 quarters, suppose you have a coin which represents 3 quarters of a dollar. It contains the first quarter, the half, and also the 3 quarters. If it is $1, then contains 1 quarter, half, 3/4, and also $1. So it is like $1, not like the 4 legs of a cow. But this may look a bit funny, but it's very important in this context, because the transcendental reality, the witness, is present in all the 3 stages, but still transcends, goes beyond all the 3 stages. That's an important thing. The $1 is already there in 1/4, but not full. But it is not, see, after all, 1/4 of a dollar is not totally, it has its own value. If you take $1, it contains 1/4, half, 3/4. So one can say $1 was present as a witness in both the quarter, half, and also 3/4. So what it means is, with this Turiya, the all-knowing witness, Atman, is present in all these 3 states of human consciousness. If a person can just turn his inquiry inward and ask this question, where was I? That's what Ramanuja know. What am I? Who am I? The question is. So if you ask the question, that's enough for you to reach the highest. But remember, very important thing, and Bhashyakara says, if a normal person who has got a lot of engagements and lot of thoughts in his mind asks this question, it may not work. One day you may read maybe some ultra-modern Vedantins, and they think you don't have to do anything, you are Brahman, all right, go and sleep. That doesn't help us in any way. This question and this inquiry should be made by a person who has reached that level of mental purity. It's called sadhana sadhushtaya sampatti in Sanskrit. It means mental fitness. When you reach that level of mental fitness, purity, then ask the question, who am I? That will take you all the way. But before that, we should first of all should fill our mind with spiritual thoughts, spiritual vibrations. It's called Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. The first important qualification means a discerning wisdom to understand what is real and what is unreal. And then Ikamutra Phala Bhoga Viraga. One should be able to give up what is unreal, what is changing, what is material, and one should focus on the ultimate reality. And then that will naturally give us a sense of self-restraint, self-control, sense control, samadhi, sarka sampatti, and mumukshutvam, a strong desire for spiritual enlightenment or liberation. And with that, one should read shastras, spiritual works, spiritual books, and should contemplate the meaning of what he's reading, what that person is reading, and then should practice meditation. Then when you ask the question, what am I, who am I, you may reach. Otherwise, in fact, there's a problem. In modern times, if you read YouTube, people will tell you. In fact, I'm very happy to say something very interesting here. Long ago, I read one interesting article by a very, very sensible American. I know why I emphasize American, because in this you can find in modern Western world a lot of YouTube. So you'll say 20 minutes Vedanta, you can go back, you will reach Brahman, your Kundalini will immediately reach Sahasrara. All those things you find. So in this context, this is very important, so mentioning. So the name of the article was Not So Fast or the Enlightened One. That is the title of the article. Not so fast, comma, or enlightened one. So somebody had written some absolute trash saying that you read all this and you don't have to worry about anything. You can immediately become one with Brahman. It doesn't take much time. It's a crash program. So referring to this trend in modern times, this wonderful American, I think if I'm not wrong, I think I read it in Global Vedanta, with some old edition maybe. I think in a very old edition. It is a Ramanuja Mission publication published from Seattle. I'm not sure, but if my memory is right, I think it appeared in Global Vedanta. But I emphasize the point that it is written by an American Vedanta student who didn't want this ultra-modern, this super-fast methods of spiritual journey. So he said, not so fast, comma, or enlightened one. That is the very title of the article. And then he was saying this sort of modern crash programs in spiritual life are not only useless but even dangerous. That was the burden of the article. Anyway, thank you very much. Now we can have interaction. Most welcome. Okay, thank you.
David, you used the raise hand function under reactions first. Thank you very much. Please go ahead. Oh, enlightened one.
Maybe David can verify me. Did it appear in Global Vedanta? I believe it comes from your center.
You know, I don't remember.
Global Vedanta. Yeah. Okay.
There was. I do remember Swami Sarvagatananda's story, though. I don't know if you've heard that.
If we can narrate the story, it'd be wonderful for our audience, you know.
Just people who think they've reached it. He got a call from the hospital once, Sarvagatananda Swami, and somebody was saying they were stuck in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So they called him and they said, you know, we know you, and so he said, well, I don't know, but I'll see what I can do. And he came to the hospital. And the person said he's stuck. And so Swami Sarvagatananda decided, he just hit him in the head and said, go down to the Kundalini. He said his Kundalini and got up, and then he was cured.
Okay.
So it was,
thank you for that.
Okay. But it was people who are... So I had a question.
Yeah.
I've read that I think what you were talking was the Abhastatya method, and I've heard of the Drigdrisha as a separate method. And I'm curious, is that true? And then also, does a bhakta just know these intellectually, or should a bhakta actually try to practice these, or only practice? You know, so it's a two-sided question. Are there different methods within the Jnana Marga, and also should a bhakta just know that these exist, or should the bhakta actually try them?
Yeah.
Never.
You know, could you the one word that you used was not clear to me in the beginning of you said. Okay, I understand. Yeah.
Is that the one where the four? I thought it was the Abhastatya method. Anyway, where you, I think what you were describing is you look at the four states, but I've also heard that Drigdrisha is a different method.
Drigdrisha, okay.
Yeah.
So
but I'm curious, does a bhakta need to know those, need to practice those, or not really?
Yeah. Drigdrisha Viveka is a very short Prakarana Grantha, introductory work in metrical form by Shankaracharya. It is also very brief, but its basis also is Avasthatraya. It's very brief, you know. So I will come to this subject, very interesting subject. You know, whether this apophatic method is applicable only in Jnana Yoga or Jnana, the path of Jnana, whether it has any relevance in Bhakti. In fact, Rudolf Otto is the one who interpreted Eckhart's works and theology in modern times. So today, you know, Eckhart got a new life thanks to Rudolf Otto. His books have been translated in English. So there he talks about the difference between Shankaracharya's Advaita and Eckhart. You know, Eckhart did not leave monotheism behind. He still held fast to the devotional element of Christian monotheism. Maybe because maybe he didn't want to be branded as a heretic, which was dangerous in those times. He will be even persecuted and be killed. So that could be the reason. But anyway, coming to the subject directly, you know what? I mean, spiritually speaking, a bhakta, a devotee who reaches the highest level of prapatti, is a word used by Ramanuja in Ramanuja Vedanta tradition, you know, he experiences something very similar to what a Jnana Margi, those who follow path of Jnana, experiences in Jnana. But remember, when it comes to theology and philosophy, the vocabulary will be different. But experience is always beyond vocabulary, language and words. So, for example, in the Bhagavata Purana, there is a dialogue between the 11th skandha Bhagavata Purana, maybe the second chapter, the dialogue between 9 sages and the same Janaka, philosopher king. It is called Janaka Navayogi Samvada. So, Janaka and Navayogi, there is an interesting dialogue between them. So, one question that that Janaka puts to these 9 sages. He asks one question each to all these 9 sages. So one question is, who is an ideal devotee? That's the question. Bhagavatottama, Bhagavatanam Uttama means who is the most sublime devotee of God. So the answer given is, Sarva Bhudeshu Yapashyet Bhagavad Bhavam Atmanaha Bhudani Bhagavadi Atmani Esha Bhagavatottama. What means is, the highest devotee of God is one who sees God in everything and everyone, and who sees everyone in God. Now, if you look at the whole thing from an experience perspective, it's the same thing that an Advaita realizes, that unity and oneness of creation and existence. But again, you should always remember, mysticism it transcends philosophy and theology. Frequently, many mystics dare not to put their experiences in so many words. That's because of the problem that you know very well in Middle Ages. It's a dangerous thing to say anything against the established church. So anyway, there's a different subject. So the point is, at the level of experience, the prapatti aspect. Prapatti means total surrender. When that happens, there are moments when a devotee feels the same oneness of creation, existence, and God. The Sri Ramakrishna puts in simple language, Bhagavan, Bhakta, and Bhagavata. Bhagavata stands for, let us say, the teachings of spiritual theology, let us say, philosophy. I mean, that's it. Corresponds to philosophy. And Bhakta means devotee. And the Lord. So all one. So that oneness is always an experience that is common at all levels. But the vocabulary may not reach up to that level. The greatness of Shankaracharya was, he created an elaborate vocabulary. An absolutely wonderful vocabulary. If you look at his contribution to the Advaita epistemology, eschatology, concepts of, there are descriptions of death and destiny in Brahma Sutras, eschatological ideas, very wonderful. So, at the experience level, a bhakta also realizes this indescribable nature of God, non-definable, incomprehensible, trans-empirical nature of the Supreme. He feels that, but again, when he puts a language, he may use the language of a devotee of a monotheistic hierarchy. That's idea. In the Bhagavad Purana, you find Prahlada, a small little boy of 5 years. He sometimes felt total oneness with God, and sometimes he felt that it's far away. He will cry, weep. I don't know. There are long verses in the which very similar to the experiences described by the pilgrim in the way of a pilgrim when he first realized when he learned the Jesus prayer from the Russian Orthodox monk from the cell. He felt the whole world enlightened, everything lit by divine love for everyone. So you find at the experience level is the same, but the philosophical, theological level, it may appear to be different. That's the thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Swami.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Sri Ram, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Akshay, you're next after Sri Ram.
In the light of what you described today, different declarations in the Upanishads, I heard the Āstika Suktam being quoted as being a very famous mantra.
Yeah.
Can you put some light on that in this sense?
Yeah, Āstika Suktam, it is a Srishti Suktam, it's called Rigveda Samhita, 10th mandala. You find, of course, at the beginning, Nasadasi, Nosadasi, but that's a beginning. There is one statement which gives a peep into the transcendental. Sato bandhum asadi niravindan kriti pradishya kavayo manisha. So, Sato bandhum asadi niravindan. Sayana's commentaries, Sataha means Brahmanaga, bandhu means karanam. So, the devotee was looking for the origin of the universe And he tried everywhere. He could not find the origin of the universe, the nature of the Supreme Reality outside. Finally, he turned inward. Asadi Niravindan Hridi Pradishya Kavayo. Hridi means Hridaya Guhaya, means within the depths of one's own being, he realized. Hridi Pradishya Kavayo Manisha. So, these enlightened sages realized the supreme truth, supreme reality within the depths of their own being, their own hearts. That's a literal translation based on Sayana's commentary. So, it is a supreme work. Nasadya Sutta is absolutely, completely Advaitic. There are many statements in Rigveda Samhita which are pantheistic, which actually extols the beauty of nature, In fact, the description of the 10 rivers, all that examples. But there are also great statements which are purely Advaita. Nasadya Suktam is one of the sublime Advaitic testaments into Rigveda Samhita. Okay.
Thank you. Akshay, you're next.
Yeah.
Pranam.
Namaskar.
I had a question that Sri Ramakrishna said that God can be known through the pure mind. So it is not matching with that.
Yeah. God can be known through pure mind. Is it so? That's what you're saying? Correct, yes. Correct. That says. Actually, if you have pure mind, we don't need any of these books. I tell you, it's a fact. For those who are born with the mind is absolutely pure, they don't need these books. But books are important, philosophy is important because people want to feed their mind with great thoughts and ideas so that they can elevate the mind to a higher level. See, Sri Ramanuja's own disciple, Swami Advaita, he was almost illiterate, but he lived with Sri Ramanuja, he meditated, he prayed. So if you have got the grace of God, and if you have a pure heart, you don't need philosophy or books. That you are right, absolutely right. But not all people are born with that mentality. See, Vivekananda also had a pure heart, but he needed philosophy. Because he had a mission, he had to teach, he had to give lectures, he had to teach others who were perhaps not born with the same mind, same degree, level of pure mind. So remember, you are right, you are absolutely right that if you have got a pure mind, you don't need anything. You are absolutely right. But at the same time, great teachers, great saints, they taught the world, they taught a lot of philosophical ideas, philosophical concepts for the good of humanity. Okay? Very good question. Thank you. What's your name?
Akshay.
Okay, most welcome. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay.
Thank you, Akshay, also for your help in the chat room.
Yeah, wonderful,
well.
wonderful,
Very much.
wonderful.
Ranjit has a question. Yogi, I see your hand.
Okay.
Let's let Ranjit go first.
Regarding the first question, when you discuss both Jnana Yoga and Bhakti, so if you do sadhana, for example, there is also, I have heard examples of bicycle riding as an example of when you cannot know the bicycle riding, you have to practice it, and then only you can learn the riding bicycle. Yeah. So this often I have heard sometime discussing in this context some other. So my question is sadhana a bhakti, part of bhakti, or is it also part of Jnana Yoga?
Yeah, sadhana is common in both. In fact, sadhana sadhushtaya I mentioned, it is specifically mentioned for Advaita in the Viveka Chudamani. But I mentioned sadhana sadhushtaya sampatti. Iha, that is nityanitya vastu viveka, iha mutra phala bhoga viragya, samadhi shakka sampatti, mumukshutvam, and sravanam, mananam, vididhyasram. 7 disciplines. They specially mentioned in the context of aspirants of Advaita and Viveka Chudamani. But in the broader context, it essentially means mental preparedness. See, when you take to spiritual life, you need to prepare yourself, your mind. So, in fact, the very question recently Akshay asked, that's books and philosophy and all that. They are all very helpful for us to get to create an intellectual concept of what spiritual life is all about. So, that kind of preparedness is important not only in Jnana Yoga, in Vedanta, also in Bhakti tradition. But remember, in Bhakti, there is something different which is not found in Vedantic tradition. That is, in Bhakti, you don't have to give up anything. You don't have to, if you have a strong determination and total sincerity and a lot of real desire, love for God, then that strong spiritual aspiration will take care of all other problems. That is true, no doubt about it. If you have such a high devotion, then you don't have to carefully, slowly practice other things. Your devotion itself will make you practice sadhana. That is true in all traditions, in Hindu tradition, Christian tradition. Narada's description is Satu Asmin Parama Prema Rupa. That Chandilya Sa Paranurakti Ishware. All mean the supreme love for God is bhakti. That is the definition of bhakti in bhakti tradition. That is true. If you have got that kind of bhakti, that bhakti itself will create in your mind that mental preparedness. Absolutely, no doubt about it. There are people, great mystics everywhere. Sometimes a problem, Melpatu, he had this romanticism. There's a great poet, one of the greatest poets of scholars of his times in India, 16th century. He had a terrible mental problem, also physical problem, rheumatism. And he was a great scholar, a marvelous scholar in all disciplines, but he became so miserable because of his rheumatism, and he turned all his problems to God. And he became a great poet, and so there are many wonderful examples in many traditions. In Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, Christian tradition, Jewish tradition, you find sometimes, a strong love for God, a strong aspiration will naturally make you ready for the highest spiritual practice. That is one thing. But we are now discussing certain traditional Vedantic discipline because they are all well structured ideas which are important. This devotion doesn't come all of a sudden. One should have practiced a lot of spiritual sadhanas in the past, then only that kind of devotion will come. Another thing I want to tell you, the very gentleman who wrote all these bhashya, Shankaracharya Bhashya, is also the greatest devotion poet of India. 65 devotional poems. Even yesterday we had Durga Puja here. It was concluded with a marvelous rendition of Bhavani Ashtakam. Absolutely. Gadistum Tumega Bhavani. That means, oh mother, you are the only refuge. That's how he concludes. And it is written by a great philosopher. So where do you draw the line? There is no line of demarcation in spiritualism. Bhakti, jnanam, or path of devotion, path of knowledge. There is no real line of demarcation. Okay? Because Divine Mother alone helps you to get out of all difficulties, and Divine Mother herself puts obstacles on your path so that you will work hard, you will aspire, and you will attain the highest level of preparedness and reach the highest goal. So that's the meaning here. So you find Shakti Rubena Samsthida, Buddhi Rubena Samsthida, Chaya Rubena Samsthida, Shraddha Rubena Samsthida, all that you find. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Mother is the one who, Sarvarubena Samsida you find also. Mother is the one. So the idea you can find even in some statements which are obviously monotheistic, you can find the Advaitic dimension. I mentioned this earlier. In many of the greatest devotional stotras, devotional poems, you find everywhere you find some kind of monotheistic, dualistic mother or God and Bhakta and Bhagavan, Ishvara and Jiva. But you find, to the conclusion you find, in many places you find pure Advaita. You find. I mean, wherever you find, when you conceive of Divine Mother as an all-pervading divine reality, you are actually coming to Advaita. That's all. Advaita accommodates everything. It doesn't negate, it doesn't reject anything. It transcends everything. It doesn't reject everything. That's the idea, right? So there are many mantras in the Chandi, which is Advaitic. One of the mantras which are uttered part of Durga Puja is Antaya Bahuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. It comes in Yajurveda actually. Antaya Bahuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. That's the meaning. It means the language of the infinite is silence. The language of the finite is verbosity. You can write volumes when you describe something that is finite. When you try to describe and define, explain the infinite, the language you use is silence. Antaya Bahuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. Ananta means infinite. Mukha means silence. So that idea you find in the very, very, there are many ordinary devotional hymns which are profoundly Advaitic in many aspects. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Maharaj, there's a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my best to ask it for the questioner.
Yeah.
The verbatim is, how does knowing Brahman is only real? Does that IDK, meaning I don't know? Oh, I see. He's clarified. Does that I don't know generate apathy? So he's rephrased the question. My question is that Brahman is only real, then can it generate lack of concern for others or apathy with respect to other people?
Oh, yeah. See, I can only quote one statement from Swami Vivekananda's complete verse, where he says, the infinite Atman is the only eternal sanction of all morality, all ethics and all good actions. And another context, the infinite oneness of the soul, in another context. The infinite oneness of the soul is the eternal sanction of all morality, all ethics, all good actions. See, when you look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family, not only humanity, the whole creation, including the animal kingdom, including the phenomenal world, when you look upon the entire creation as one spiritual family, because it's all manifestation of the same Atman, that becomes the highest moral philosophy, the highest and most sublime foundation of ethics and morality. You cannot do any harm to anybody. Shankaracharya, when he writes a commentary on one well-known verse in the Mandukya Karika called Gaudapada Karika. So Siddhanta Vyavasthasu Doitino Nichida Dudam Parasparam Virudhyante Taihi Ayam Na Virudhyate. What Shankaracharya says is, those who don't accept Advaita, those who think my God is wonderful, my book is great, my religion is fine, and I and God, my God, are in very good terms. And he says, that's true for other religions. That means all dualistic concepts. They sometimes have quarrel among themselves. But he says, Advaita cannot quarrel with anyone. Because it's just like, and his commentary he says, it's just like if, to quarrel with others, to have no sympathy for others, it's just like hitting your head with your own right hand. You feel the pain. Because you and others are non-different. There is no otherness in Advaita. That's why Vivekananda said the infinite oneness of the soul, which is Advaita philosophy, is the eternal sanction of all morality, all ethics, and all good actions. Vivekananda says, of course there are ethical principles everywhere, but the idea that spiritually we are all one family, not only human beings, not only human race, but entire creation is one spiritual family. That affinity, that spiritual or egalitarianism is the most wonderful ethical philosophy. That's what Vivekananda says. So this is an important thing to remember. I think I gave this example, I gave this example a long time ago. If you go to India, you'll be surprised. The second oldest Jewish synagogue in the world is in India. The second oldest Muslim mosque is in India. And India is the one country where people from everywhere in the world, the Parsis in 7th century, the Israelites in the 1st century AD, and of course Christians also in the 1st and 2nd century AD, they all came to India and found their own homeland there. It's all because people were not participating in interfaith dialogues when they came in 1st century. But they have read at least the influence of the Vedic dictum, that is, Indram Mitram Varunam Aknirahu Adho Divyasa Suparno Gurutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bhagudha Vadandi Aknim Yama Matrishwana Mahu. It comes from Rigveda Samhita, first mandala, 164th Sukta. You find all names, all religions, all so many different names, different ways of explaining the same supreme reality. Ekam Sat, reality is one. Vipraha Bhagudha Vadanti. Knowledgeable people call that reality by different names. This possibility of unity in diversity and oneness of existence and creation, that is a unique feature. Remember, sometimes it goes very deep into the cultural roots. People may not know all this scripture, philosophy and all that. But the idea that whatever you may be, you may be different in many, many ways, but still, when you are sincere and you turn to some higher transcendental reality with a prayer, you are reaching that goal. You need not follow my path, nor do I have to follow your path. So that's why, this universal ethical philosophy you find in Vedas and Vedanta. Thank you for the question. Yeah. I think we have reached the end of our time now, almost 7:30.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I wanted to thank you for that answer because it's the opposite of apathy. Clearly, it's the...
that's as far as I can go with that. You can go speaking for hours, but there's not. So thank you for all the wonderful questions and discussions. We'll conclude and we'll continue next week. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. Thank you. Thank you everyone. Yeah, thank you.